Once upon a time, there was a young girl named Dorothy who lived in Kansas with her Aunt Em and her little dog Toto. One day, after spending the day playing with Toto, Dorothy returned to the farm in a hurry. Her aunt was used to this behavior from Dorothy, so Aunt Em asked, "What is it, Dorothy?"
What is it, Dorothy?
Dorothy felt like she could have cried as she said, "You won't believe what Miss Gulch did to Toto today."
You won't believe what Miss Gulch did to Toto today.
But Aunt Em didn't have time for that. She waved Dorothy away and said, "Not now, Dorothy. I'm busy."
Not now, Dorothy. I'm busy.
Dorothy sighed, knowing not to push. It wasn't like Aunt Em knew too much about me, old Miss Gulch, anyway. Aunt Em gestured toward their farm and said, "Now find a place where you won't get into any trouble."
I'll find a place where you won't get into any trouble.
Aunt Em left. And Dorothy could have laughed at her words. She always seemed to be getting into trouble. She looked down at Toto and said, "Do you suppose there is such a place, Toto?"
Suppose there is such a place, Toto.
She looked up into the sky, wondering if such a place existed. She sighed and said, "It must be behind the moon, beyond the rain, or somewhere over the rainbow."
It must be behind the moon, beyond the rain, or somewhere over the rainbow.
Just then, a strong gust of wind caught Dorothy's attention, and she looked off into the distance to see a twister heading right for them. Without hesitation, she grabbed Toto and dashed toward the house, seeking shelter from the approaching storm. But before she could fully grasp what was happening, the house was lifted clean off the ground, spinning wildly through the air. And when it finally came to a stop, Dorothy found herself in a land unlike anything she had ever seen before. As Dorothy emerged from her house, she looked at her new surroundings. The world around her shimmered with color. Rolling green hills stretched beneath a brilliant blue sky, and tiny round houses with bright colored walls dotted the landscape. Their doors just the right size so that small, cheerful people could peek out curiously. A winding path bright as gold curled through the heart of the village, leading to a sparkling city that could be seen in the distance. Dorothy couldn't pull her eyes away from the landscape as she said, "Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore."
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Just when Dorothy thought things couldn't get any more unbelievable, a shimmering bubble suddenly floated gracefully toward her. As it descended, the shape of a person became visible within, her presence radiant and otherworldly. This was Glinda the Good Witch. Glinda smiled at Dorothy and asked, "Are you a good witch or a bad witch?"
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
Dorothy couldn't believe her ears. What kind of question was this? Dorothy shook her head and said, "I'm not a witch at all. I'm Dorothy Gale from Kansas."
I'm not a witch at all. I'm Dorothy Gale from Kansas.
This didn't seem to matter to Glinda much. Glinda continued on and said, "The Munchkins called me because a new witch dropped a house on the Wicked Witch of the East."
The Munchkins called me because a new witch dropped the house on the Wicked Witch of the East.
The last thing Dorothy wanted was to be known as a witch. She hugged Toto tighter and said, "I'm not a witch at all. Witches are old and ugly."
I'm not a witch at all. Witches are old and ugly.
A new voice suddenly laughed at this, and Dorothy turned to see a boy making his way closer, a munchkin named Doc. Doc laughed, "Ha ha ha, that's funny."
Ha ha, that's funny.
Dorothy was surprised someone else had come up to talk to her. Dorothy asked, "Who are you, and why is that funny?"
Who are you? Why is that funny?
Doc smiled to introduce himself and said, "I'm Doc Woodsman of Munchkinland."
I'm Doc Woodson of Munchkinland.
Glinda nodded and said, "He's laughing because I am a witch."
He's acting because I am a witch.
Dorothy realized her mistake and immediately felt horrible for insinuating Glinda was old and ugly when she was anything but. Dorothy apologized, "Oh, I'm sorry. I've never heard of a beautiful witch before."
I'm sorry, I haven't heard of a beautiful witch before.
Wanting to save Dorothy from making the situation even more awkward, Doc changed the subject and said, "You freed us from Nessa Rose, the Wicked Witch of the East."
You freed us from Nessa Rose, the Wicked Witch of the East.
But then Doc seemed to remember something, his smile disappearing as he said, If only we could find my brother Bach, everything would be perfect.
If only we can find my brother Walt, everything would be perfect.
Wanting to change the subject herself, Glinda turned toward the rest of the Munchkins and said, "Let the joyous news be spread, the wicked witch at last is dead."
Let the joyous news be spread, the wicked witch is last dead.
But the celebration was short-lived when suddenly another witch appeared, scaring all the other Munchkins back into hiding with her evil cackle. Glinda looked the wicked witch up and down and said, "This is the wicked witch of the west. She's worse than the other one was."
This is the wicked witch of the west. She's worse than the other one was.
The wicked witch took one look at her sister squashed underneath Dorothy's house and spun on the newcomer. The wicked witch pointed right at Dorothy and said, "Who killed my sister? Was it you?"
Who killed my sister? Was it you?
Terrified, Dorothy shook her head. Dorothy insisted, "No, it was an accident."
No, it was an accident.
But the wicked witch wasn't about to believe that. She glared at Dorothy and said, "Well, my little pretty, I can cause accidents too."
No, my little boy, I because accidents too.
The wicked witch seemed to remember something then, turning back toward her sister as her legs continued to stick out from underneath Dorothy's house. The wicked witch shouted, "The slippers are gone. What have you done with them?"
The slippers are gone. What have you done with them?
Glinda smiled, gesturing down to Dorothy's feet where the ruby slippers now were. Dorothy hadn't even noticed them. Glinda pointed to the shoes and said, "It's too late. There they are, and there they'll stay."
It's too late. There they are, and there they stay.
The wicked witch was angry now. The wicked witch demanded, "Give them back to me."
Give them back to me.
But Glinda wasn't about to back down. She merely continued to smile and said, "Their magic must be pretty powerful, or else you wouldn't want them so badly. Elphaba?"
The magic must be pretty powerful, or you won't want them so badly. Alphabet?
A look Dorothy couldn't decipher flashed across the wicked witch's face, but it was gone in an instant. Dorothy didn't even have a moment to decipher what exactly Glinda had called her before the wicked witch said, "You stay out of this, Glinda."
You say Albus, Glinda.
Glinda waved the wicked witch away and said, "Be gone before somebody drops a house on you too."
Be gone before someone drops a house on you too.
The wicked witch knew she had no power in Munchkinland, so she needed to leave and bide her time. She turned back toward Dorothy and threatened, "I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too."
I'll give you my play and a little dog too.
And then she was gone. But Dorothy knew this wouldn't be the last she'd see of the wicked witch. She began to worry and said, "I need to get home. How will I do
I
that?"
need to get home. How will I do that?
Glinda seemed to think for a moment before she said, "The only person who might help is the great and wonderful Wizard of Oz."
The only person who might help is the great and wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Dorothy couldn't help but ask, "Is he good or is he wicked?" Before Glinda could answer, Doc spoke up and said, "Very good."
Very good.
Glinda seemed to bite her tongue before she said, "But very mysterious."
But very mysterious.
Not picking up on Glinda's tone, Doc said, "He lives in the Emerald City."
He lives in the Emerald City.
Dorothy nodded and asked, "How do I get to the Emerald City?"
How do I get to the Emerald City?
Glinda turned toward the golden pathway that sat directly in the middle of Munchkinland. Glinda pointed to the path and said, "All you do is follow the yellow brick road. Doc and I will accompany you."
All you do is follow the yellow brick road. Me and Doc will accompany you.
Doc grew very excited by this, as if he suddenly got an idea. Doc asked, "Maybe the wizard can help me find my brother."
Maybe the wizard can help me find my brother.
Very excited, Doc turned to Glinda and asked, "Do you have something you wish to ask the wizard for, Miss Glinda?"
You have something you wish to ask for, Miss Glinda?
Glinda shook her head and said, "No, but I have other business to take care of."
No, but I have other business to take care
But
of.
Glinda didn't want to say anything more than that, turning their attention back to the task at hand as she said, "Now let's follow the yellow brick road."
Now let's follow the yellow brick road.
And then they were off. As Dorothy, Glinda, and Doc continued down the yellow brick road, they suddenly came to a fork in the road right in front of a scarecrow. Dorothy looked around and said, "Now which way do we go?"
Now which way do we go?
Doc tapped his chin and said, "They all look the same to me."
They all look the same to me.
Suddenly, the scarecrow in front of them smiled and pointed off into the distance. The scarecrow said, "That way's a rather nice way."
That way's around a nice way.
Scared by the sudden voice, Dorothy looked around and asked, "Who said that?"
Who said that?
The scarecrow pointed in the opposite direction and said, "It's nice down that way too."
It's nice down that way too.
Glinda stared at the scarecrow, just as surprised as Dorothy and Doc. Glinda asked, "You're the one talking, aren't you?"
You're the one talking, aren't you?
The scarecrow's head shook left and right as if to say no, only to immediately nod right after as if to say yes. Dorothy was confused by this answer and asked, "Are you doing that on purpose, or can't you make up your mind?"
How are you doing that on purpose, so can you make up your mind?
The scarecrow let out a big sigh and said,
I can't make up my mind. I haven't got a brain.
They studied the scarecrow up close, struck rustling with every move. Doc finally asked, "How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?"
How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?
The wind blew through the golden cornfield around them as the Scarecrow said, "Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?"
Some people they do an awful lot of talking, don't they?
As a crow flew toward them, it didn't bat an eye as it landed directly next to the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow tried to scare it away,
Shoot!
but it was no use. The crow only flew away on its own accord. The Scarecrow was sad and said, "I'm a failure because I haven't got a brain."
I'm a failure because I haven't got a brain.
Dorothy suddenly got an idea. She took a step closer to the Scarecrow and said, "Maybe the wizard could give you a brain."
Maybe there was something to do with it.
Doc loved this idea because the more the merrier. He smiled a big smile and said, "Come with us, Scarecrow."
Come with us, Scarecrow.
The Scarecrow couldn't pass this opportunity up. The Scarecrow shrugged and said, "Why not?"
Why not?
As Dorothy and Doc continued on ahead down the yellow brick road, Glinda studied the Scarecrow with curious eyes. Glinda said, "You seem awfully familiar. Have we met before?"
You seem awfully familiar. Have we met before?
Oh, but the Scarecrow was already off, so clearly that was not the case. As they continued down the yellow brick road, they suddenly came across a person made out of tin. Completely rusted in the forest. Dorothy gasped and said, "Why, it's a person made out of tin."
It's a person made out of tin.
The Tin Man tried to talk, but nothing would come out clearly. But Glinda knew what the Tin Man was saying. She pointed to the oil can that sat right beside the Tin Man, and Glinda said, "That Tin Man said oil can."
That Tin Man said oil can.
The Scarecrow asked, "Oil can what?"
Oil can what?
Ignoring the Scarecrow, Dorothy grabbed the oil can before turning back toward the Tin Man. Dorothy asked, "Where do you want to be oiled first?"
You want to be oiled first.
But as the Tin Man tried to speak, it still came out all muffled due to a rusted shut jaw. The Doc seemed to understand what the Tin Man wanted, and Doc said, "The Tin Man's mouth should be first."
The Tin Man's mouth should be first.
Dorothy used the oil can to douse the Tin Man, who slowly began to move freely once again. The Tin Man cried, "My goodness, I can talk again."
Oh goodness, I can talk again.
The Tin Man pointed downward and said, "Make sure to get my knees."
Make sure to get my knees.
Once Dorothy was done with the oil can, she looked back at the Tin Man and asked, "How did you ever get like this?"
How did you ever get like this?
The Tin Man continued to move around as if to test that every limb could still move. The Tin Man answered, "About a year ago, it suddenly began to rain and I rusted here, but I can't remember much besides that."
Mom, about a year ago, it suddenly began to rain and I was here, but I can't remember much besides that.
Doc nodded at the Tin Man's words. Doc said, "I remember how rainy it was."
I remember how rainy it was, and that's when my brother went missing, and I went all over looking for him.
This made the Tin Man pause for a moment for a reason no one understood. The Tin Man said, "All I can remember for sure is that I have no heart."
All I can remember was I have no heart.
At this statement, Dorothy once again got an idea. She smiled and said, "You should come with us to ask the Wizard of Oz for a heart."
You should come with us to ask the Wizard of Oz for a heart.
But the Tin Man wasn't so trustworthy. Who was this wizard anyway? The Tin Man asked, "Do you really think he would?"
Do you really think he would?
But before anyone could answer, the Wicked Witch of the West's cackle suddenly rang throughout the forest. The Wicked Witch pointed and said, "The wizard won't be able to help you."
The Wizard won't be able to help you.
The Wicked Witch pointed at Dorothy, wanting them all to understand what she was about to say. The Wicked Witch warned, "If you're smart, you'll stay away from her and those slippers."
If you're smart, to stay away and with slippers.
And the Wicked Witch was off after that cryptic warning, already planning her next ambush against Dorothy and her friends. The Scarecrow turned toward Dorothy and said, "I'm not scared of her. We'll get you to the wizard."
I'm not scared of her. We'll get you to the Wizard.
Doc nodded and said, "She won't stop us."
She won't stop us.
Linda was happy to see that Dorothy's friends were willing to help her. Linda smiled and said, "You're all very brave."
We're all very brave.
Dorothy took a step closer to the yellow brick road. The Scarecrow smiled and said, "To Oz."
To Oz.
With newfound determination, Dorothy and her friends continued down the yellow brick road. Dorothy said, "We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz."
To see the Wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
As they continued through the forest and down the yellow brick road, there their surroundings began to grow dreary and dark. Dorothy looked around and said, I don't like this part of the forest. Glinda nodded in agreement and said, it is rather dark and creepy.
It is rather dark and creepy.
Dorothy asked, do you suppose we'll meet any wild animals?
Suppose we'll meet any wild animals?
After spending a year rusted in the forest, the Tin Man knew what they possibly could have run into. The Tin Man said, all we have to worry about are lions and tigers and bears.
All we had to worry about is lions and tigers and bears.
Dorothy's eyes darted nervously between the trees as she gasped, lions and tigers and bears, oh my!
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Before anyone could say another word, a sudden growl pierced the air. From behind a cluster of trees, a large figure jumped out and bounded toward them. The Cowardly Lion put up her fist and said, put 'em up, put 'em up.
Put 'em up, put 'em up.
The Cowardly Lion puffed up her chest as she continued to raise her paws in a dramatic show of strength. Her eyes scanned the group, challenging them one by one. The Cowardly Lion asked, which one of you first?
Which one is you first?
In a moment of bravery, Doc shook his fist at the Cowardly Lion and said, leave us alone.
Leave us alone.
The Cowardly Lion held back a laugh at the Munchkin. The Cowardly Lion said, scared, huh? Afraid, huh?
Scared, huh? Afraid, huh?
The Scarecrow stepped forward and said, we said leave us alone.
We said leave us alone.
The Cowardly Lion tried to seem much more fearsome than she truly was. The Cowardly Lion growled, come on, get up and fight.
Come on, get up and fight.
Tired of the arguing, Dorothy stepped forward and pointed right in the Cowardly Lion's face. Dorothy shouted, stop, you're being bad.
Stop, you're being bad.
The Cowardly Lion blinked in surprise at her words, unable to believe what Dorothy had just said to her. The Cowardly Lion looked like she was about to cry as she asked, me? Bad? Glinda rolled her eyes and said, some big ferocious lion.
Some big ferocious lion.
Dorothy stood her ground, refusing to back down. Dorothy said, well, I wouldn't have said it if it weren't true.
I would have said it if you weren't sure you're nothing but a really big coward.
Her feelings hurt, the Cowardly Lion began to cry. Sobbing into her hands, the Cowardly Lion agreed with Dorothy and said, you're right, I am a coward.
You're right, I am a coward.
The Cowardly Lion continued to cry as she thought about what she had gone through in the past. The Cowardly Lion said, I had no courage since I was saved by a witch.
I had no courage, I had saved by a witch.
And left in these woods as a cub.
And left of these woods as a cub.
Glinda lifted an eyebrow as if she knew more than she let on. She watched the Cowardly Lion and said, that's what happens when you don't fight your own battles.
That's what happens when you don't fight your own battle.
The group exchanged glances, considering the Cowardly Lion's story. The Tin Man, feeling hopeful, turned to Dorothy with an idea. The Tin Man asked, do you think the wizard could help her too?
Do you think the wizard can help her too?
The Cowardly Lion gasped, surprised that she was being met with such kindness after she'd come at them so harshly. The Cowardly Lion asked, you'd let me come with you?
You let me come with you.
Dorothy nodded and said, the wizard will fix everything.
The wizard will fix everything.
The Cowardly Lion was now crying happy tears as she said, you're so kind, thank you.
So kind, thank you.
But the Wicked Witch wasn't going to let them go any farther if she had anything to say about it. She appeared before them once again, ready with her magic to finally get her shoes back. The Wicked Witch said, you give me those slippers, or else your friends will get it.
You give me those slippers, or else your friends will get it.
But Glinda was one step ahead of the Wicked Witch. Stepping in front of Dorothy, Glinda said, those shoes will never come off as long as Dorothy is alive.
Those shoes will never come off as long as Dorothy's alive.
The Wicked Witch couldn't help but laugh at that. Did Glinda think that would stop her? The Wicked Witch said, that can be arranged.
That can be arranged.
The Cowardly Lion looked at their surroundings, feeling as though the trees were coming closer and closer and trapping them by the Wicked Witch's magic. The Cowardly Lion cried, we're trapped! Trapped like mice!
We're trapped like mice!
The Wicked Witch glared at them, her patience wearing thin. The Wicked Witch shouted, I'm growing tired of this game. I'll get rid of all of you.
I'm getting tired of this game. I'll get rid of all of you.
The Wicked Witch raised one hand, conjuring a flickering flame at her fingertips. Her eyes went straight to the Scarecrow, a grin spreading across her face as the Wicked Witch said, how about a little fire, Scarecrow?
How about a fire, Scarecrow?
Flames ignited the edge of the Scarecrow's sleeve, sending straw-filled arms filling in panic. Terrified, the Scarecrow cried, I'm burning! I'm burning!
I'm burning! I'm burning!
Without hesitation, Dorothy grabbed a nearby bucket of water, her heart pounding as she raced to save the Scarecrow before it was too late. Dorothy shouted, I'll help you!
I'll help you.
The water splashed not only onto the Scarecrow, but onto the Wicked Witch as well. She let out a piercing shriek, her form twisting and dissolving before their eyes. The Wicked Witch screamed, look what you've done! I'm melting! I'm melting!
Look what I've done. Melting, melting.
And then she was gone, and silence hung in the air for a moment before the Cowardly Lion stepped forward, her eyes wide. The Cowardly Lion said, the Wicked Witch of the West is dead!
The Wicked Witch of the West is dead!
The Scarecrow was slightly singed from the fire, but unharmed. Turning back toward the yellow brick road, the Scarecrow said, now we must keep going to see the wizard.
No, we must keep going to see the wizard.
Glinda stopped them before they could take another step. Glinda said, actually, that will no longer be necessary.
Actually, that will be no longer necessary.
Dorothy was confused, her excitement over defeating the Wicked Witch of the West faltering as she turned to Glinda for an explanation. Dorothy asked, what do you mean?
What do you mean?
Glinda stepped closer to Dorothy, smiling warmly. Glinda explained, Dorothy, you always have the power to go back to Kansas.
Dorothy, you always had the power to go back to Kansas.
The Scarecrow was just as confused as Dorothy was. What was Glinda talking about? The Scarecrow asked, then why didn't you tell her before?
Then why didn't you tell her before?
Glinda's eyes twinkled, clearly amused as she explained her reasoning to the group. Glinda said, because she wouldn't have believed me, she had to learn it for herself.
Because you wouldn't have believed me. She had to learn it for herself.
A knowing smile made its way onto her face as she revealed the truth. Glinda continued, and all the things your friends desire are things they've truly had all along.
Things that your friends desire are things they truly had all along.
Doc perked up at this, wanting nothing more than to be reunited with Bob. Could he really be able to find him again? Doc asked, even me?
Even me?
Glinda nodded, her smile now focused on Doc. Glinda assured, I believe Bach is closer than you think.
I believe Bob is closer than you think.
The Tin Man paused for a moment, seeming to be thinking about something. Something about that name tugged at a distant memory. And the Tin Man said, that name sure sounds familiar.
That name just sounds familiar.
Turning back toward Dorothy, Glinda said, you can go home whenever you wish, Dorothy. Dorothy's eyes went wide as she looked at Glinda and then at her friends. She didn't know what to say at first. She'd been on this entire adventure for nothing, but she'd met great friends along the way. Dorothy said, thank you all so much for your help.
Thank you all so much for it.
Glinda smiled at Dorothy with quiet encouragement, knowing the moment had finally come. Glinda asked, are you ready now?
Are you ready now?
Dorothy nodded, more than ready to go home. She couldn't wait to tell Aunt Em about her adventure. Dorothy took a deep breath and said, I'm ready. Happy to send Dorothy on her way home, the good witch gestured down to the ruby slippers still on her feet, and Glinda instructed, tap your heels together 3 times and say, there's no place like home.
Tap your heels 3 times together and say there's no place like home.
Dorothy closed her eyes and began to click her heels together. Her voice steady, she repeated, there's no place like home, there's no place like home, there's no place like home.
There's no place like home, there's no place like home, there's no place like
The swirling colors of Oz faded into darkness. The golden road, the towering emerald city she never did reach, and the faces of her dear friends dissolved like mist, replaced by the familiar warmth of home. Dorothy felt a gentle breeze as she opened her eyes. The soft hum of her familiar Kansas home filled the air, grounding her in the world she had longed to return to. With a smile, Dorothy looked at her surroundings and said, there's no place like home.
There's no place like home.